It was a Saturday afternoon in early September when my grandson said the 5 words that I have not stopped thinking about since. I had driven down to my son's house in Greenville to drop off a set of tools he had borrowed and never returned, the way sons do. I was not planning to stay long. I had a drive back to Asheville ahead of me, and the sky was the kind of pale gray that makes you want to be home before dark. I remember pulling into the driveway and noticing that my son's truck was gone. That happened sometimes. He worked odd hours in logistics, early mornings and late evenings, the kind of schedule that makes a family life difficult to hold together even under the best circumstances. His wife answered the door. She was a woman I had known for 4 years and had never fully understood, pleasant on the surface, careful in the way she spoke around me, the kind of pleasant that is really just distance, wearing a smile. She told me my son was out running errands. She let me in without stepping back far enough, the way some people do when they want you to feel like a guest in a house you have been coming to for years. I set the toolbox down near the door. She told me my grandson was in the backyard. I walked through the kitchen and out the sliding door to the back patio. My grandson was sitting on the concrete steps with a stick in his hand, drawing lines in the dirt at the edge of the grass. He was 9 years old that fall. He was a quiet kid, always had been, the kind of child who watches a room carefully before he decides to speak. My wife used to say he had an old soul. She said that about him the first time she held him, 2 days after he was born, and she was right the way she was right about most things. He looked up when I came out and gave me the kind of smile that is real but held back, like he was glad to see me but did not want to show too much of it. I sat down on the step beside him. We talked about school, which had just started back, and about whether he thought his baseball team would make the playoffs in the spring. He was not sure. He said the new coach was okay but not as good as the one from last year. We sat there for a while. The yard was quiet. The neighbor's dog was barking somewhere on the other side of the fence. At some point, he shifted beside me and winced, just slightly, the kind of movement a person makes when they forget for a moment to hold themselves a certain way. I noticed it the way you notice a sound that does not belong in a room, not loudly, not dramatically, just out of place. I did not say anything immediately. I watched him for another minute. He kept his left arm close to his side when he moved. I asked him if he had gotten hurt. He shook his head. I told him it looked like his arm was bothering him. He looked down at the stick in his hand, and then he looked at me, and I saw something cross his face that I had not seen on him before. Not fear, exactly. Something closer to the calculation a child makes when they are deciding how much they can trust something. He looked back at the door, through the glass to where his stepmother was moving around somewhere in the kitchen. Then he looked at me again, and he said, "Grandpa, please don't tell my dad." I kept my face still. I have been an electrician for 37 years. I have worked in conditions where keeping calm is not a choice, but a requirement. I said, "Tell your dad what, son?" He pulled the sleeve of his shirt up to the elbow. His forearm had a bruise on it the color of an old plum, wide at the center and fading at the edges. Below it, above his wrist, there was a second mark, narrower, the kind a hand makes when it grips. I looked at those marks for what could not have been more than 3 seconds. It felt much longer. I asked him, very quietly, how he got those. He pulled his sleeve back down. "She didn't mean to," he said. "She was just really upset." I asked when. He shrugged. "Thursday," he said, "after school." I told him I was going to ask him one more question, and I needed him to answer honestly. I asked him if this had happened before. He did not answer right away. He went back to drawing lines in the dirt with his stick. Then, without looking up, he said, "Sometimes." I put my hand on the back of his neck the way my father used to do with me when I was small, just resting it there, nothing more. I told him he had not done anything wrong. I told him I was glad he showed me. I told him everything was going to be fine. Inside, I was doing the thing I learned to do a long time ago in tight spaces with live wire. I was separating what I felt from what I needed to do next. I stayed another 20 minutes. I talked to my grandson about baseball and about a video game he had been wanting and about whether dogs or cats made better pets, the way grandfathers talk to grandsons. His stepmother came out once and asked if anyone wanted lemonade. I said yes and thanked her and watched her go back inside. And I held every single thing I was feeling at a distance that I can only describe as necessary. When I left, I hugged my grandson at the door. I held on a few seconds longer than usual. He let me, which told me something. I drove to the end of the block and pulled over. My wife passed away 2 years ago. A stroke. She was 61 years old, and she was in the garden when it happened, and by the time the ambulance arrived, she was already gone. There is not a day that I do not reach for the phone to call her and remember all over again. She was the person who always knew what to do when I did not. She had a kind of practical clarity that I have spent 2 years trying to imitate and have not come close to. I sat on that street in Greenville and I missed her with everything I had. Then I opened my phone and called my doctor. He has been my physician for 12 years. He is a careful man, not given to alarm, the kind of doctor who listens before he speaks. I told him what I had seen. I described the marks as specifically as I could. The location, the coloring, the shape of the narrower one above the wrist. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You need to take him to a pediatrician today, not tomorrow." He said to ask for a full physical, and to tell them privately that you have concerns about possible physical abuse. He said to be specific about what you saw. He said do not go home and wait. He said it the way you say something to someone who is still deciding whether to act. I drove back to the house. I knocked on the door and his stepmother answered, and I told her I had realized I had left my phone inside. I had not left my phone inside. She let me in, and I walked back through the house and out to the backyard again where my grandson was still sitting on the steps, and I crouched down in front of him, and I told him I wanted to take him to get some ice cream. I told him I wanted to make a quick stop first, the kind of stop where you sit on a table with the paper that crinkles. He knew what I meant. He was 9. He was not small in the way children are small when they have not yet learned to read a situation. He said, "Okay." His stepmother stood in the doorway when I took him to my truck. She asked where we were going. I said, "Dairy Queen, back in a couple hours." She looked at my grandson. She looked at me. She said to have him back by 5. In the truck, he did not say much. He looked out the window. I turned on the radio low, a country station, which he normally complained about. He did not complain. The pediatric urgent care clinic was on the east side of Greenville. The woman at the front desk was young, efficient, with a ponytail and reading glasses pushed up on her head. I leaned close to the desk and told her quietly that I was the boy's grandfather and that I needed a full physical and that I had concerns about possible abuse. I told her about the marks on his arm. I kept my voice level. She looked at me and then at my grandson, and she picked up her phone. We were in a room within 10 minutes. The doctor was a man in his mid-40s with gray at his temples and the unhurried manner of someone who has learned to slow down on purpose. He talked to my grandson first, just the two of them, while a nurse stood by the door, and I waited in the hallway. When he asked me to come back in, my grandson was sitting on the exam table with his hands folded in his lap, looking at the floor. The doctor asked me to step outside with him for a moment. In the hallway, with the door closed, he told me what he had found. The bruising on the left forearm was consistent with a grip injury, the kind that results from an adult grabbing a child's arm forcibly. There were 2 older bruises on his lower back, partially faded, consistent with impact, possibly from being pushed into a surface or struck. The boy had told him about at least 3 separate incidents over the course of the past several months. He had not told his father because he said his stepmother had told him that if he told his dad would have to choose, and that choosing would break up the family, and that it would be his fault. I stood in that hallway under fluorescent lights, and I felt something move through me that I do not have a clean word for. It was not only anger, though there was plenty of that. It was something colder. The image of a grown woman crouching down to a 9-year-old boy and placing that particular weight on his shoulders. The specific cruelty of making a child responsible for the silence that protects the person hurting him. The doctor said he was required by law to file a report with Child Protective Services. He said it had already been done. He said a caseworker would make contact within 24 hours. He said I should not return my grandson to that home tonight, and that if I could reach his father, I should do so immediately. I told him I understood. I told him to file whatever needed to be filed. I asked him to tell me what to do next. He gave me the number for the County Child Advocacy Center. He told me to keep my grandson with me. He said the most important thing I could do tonight was make sure he felt safe. And that safe meant calm, familiar, unhurried. He said children in these situations often show more once they feel the pressure lift, and that what I needed to do was simply be present and let that happen naturally. I went back into the room. My grandson was still on the table. I sat in the chair beside him and told him he had done nothing wrong. I told him he had been very brave. I told him we were going to go to my house tonight and that his dad was going to meet us there. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Is she going to be in trouble?" I told him that the people whose job it was to sort these things out were already involved, and that he did not have to worry about any of that. I told him his only job right now was to let me take care of the rest. He nodded. He slid off the exam table and stood up and picked up his jacket from the back of the chair and put it on with both arms, carefully, favoring the left one the way he had been doing all afternoon. I called my son from the parking lot. My grandson was in the back seat. I had put on the radio again, louder this time, and I had angled the rearview mirror so I could see him without him seeing me watching. My son picked up on the third ring. I could hear road noise. He was driving. I told him to pull over somewhere and call me back. He called back in 2 minutes. The road noise was gone. I told him everything. I started with the bruises on the back porch steps. I went through the urgent care visit, what the doctor found, what my grandson had said about why he had not told anyone, what had been said to him to keep him quiet. I told him about CPS. I told him I had his son in my truck and that we were driving to Asheville and that I needed him to come. There was a silence on the other end that lasted long enough that I said his name to make sure he was still there. He was still there. He said, "Say that last part again." I said it again. What had been said to his son? The part about choosing. The part about whose fault it would be. There was another silence. And then there was a sound I have heard once before in my life, from my own father, at my mother's funeral. It is the sound of a man understanding something that he cannot yet fully accept. It does not sound like crying. It is quieter than that. It is the sound of something internal giving way. He said he was on his way. I told him to drive carefully. I told him to come to my house, not his. He said he understood. He arrived in just under 3 hours. He must have come straight down I-26. He came through my front door and went directly to the living room, where my grandson was, on the couch with a blanket and a bowl of popcorn, watching a movie I had put on more to give him something to look at than anything else. My son sat down beside him and pulled him in and held him, and I walked to the kitchen and stood at the sink looking out at the backyard for a while. When my son came to find me, his eyes were red but his jaw was set. He had the same expression I have seen on him at his mother's funeral, and on the day his first marriage ended. He is not a man who falls apart in front of people. He reserves that for later, alone, which I have always considered both a strength and a burden. He asked me why. I told him what I knew. I told him what the investigation had since begun to piece together. The parts of it I would not learn fully until later, but had already started to suspect. His wife had a way of operating that was quiet and effective and designed to leave no obvious evidence. She had never liked sharing my son's attention with his son from his first marriage. She had made that clear in small ways over the years that individually could always be explained away. The hitting had started, as best as anyone could later determine, about 8 months before that September afternoon, not long after my son had taken on the extended schedule at work. It had been on the days when he was out longest. It had been accompanied, every time, by the reminder to the boy that speaking would cost him his father. My son sat at my kitchen table with his hands flat on the surface, and he asked me what he was supposed to do now. I told him the same thing I have always told him when something needed doing that was too large to see all at once. Start with tonight. Tonight, you stay here, both of you. Tomorrow morning, the caseworker comes, and you answer every question, all the way through, and you let them do their job. That is all of tonight and all of tomorrow morning. The rest comes after that, one piece at a time. He looked at the table. He said he did not understand how he had not seen it. I told him that was not the question he needed right now. I told him there would be time later, when his son was safe and the process was underway, to sit with that question as long as he needed to. But that was not tonight's work. Tonight's work was the person in the living room. He nodded. He went back in there. I heard the movie start over from the beginning because my grandson had asked him to. The CPS caseworker came to my house the following morning. She was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a lanyard, and the composed manner of someone who has done this work long enough to know when to speak and when to wait. She sat at my kitchen table with my grandson for a long time, just the two of them, while my son and I sat in the back room with the door open. She had a particular way of asking questions sideways, from an angle, letting the child lead without ever seeming to push. My grandson, it turned out, had quite a lot to say once someone was there to say it to. He had been holding it for 8 months. Afterward, while my son talked with the caseworker in the kitchen, I sat with my grandson on the back porch. He had found an old baseball glove in the garage, one that had belonged to my son when he was 12, cracked along the thumb. He was working it open and closed, feeling the leather. He asked me, without looking up, if his dad was angry. I told him his dad was not angry at him. Not one bit. He said, "But he's angry." I said, "Yes, he is, but not at you. Not even close to at you." He nodded slowly. He opened and closed the glove a few more times. Then he asked if he had done something to make her that way. I turned to look at him directly. I told him no. I said what he did or did not do had nothing to do with it. I said sometimes people who are supposed to protect us make choices that are wrong and harmful, and those choices belong entirely to them, not to the person they hurt. I told him that was hard to believe when it was someone in your own house, but that it was true, and that I needed him to keep it. He looked up at me then. He had his father's eyes, dark brown, serious. He said, "Okay, Grandpa." He went back to the glove. I sat there and thought about my wife. I thought about how she would have known exactly what to say and how long to say it and when to stop. I thought about how she would have made him something to eat that he liked and sat with him and not tried to fix everything all at once. I did the best I could with what I had. I think she would have said that was enough. I hope so. The investigation moved quickly. There was physical evidence. There was the medical documentation from the urgent care clinic. There were 2 neighbors who, when asked directly by investigators, described incidents they had heard through open windows and had not known what to do about. My son's wife had told them things about my grandson over the years, described him as difficult, prone to clumsiness, quick to make things up. She had been building a story for a long time, quietly, in case she ever needed it. She was charged with felony child abuse and willful cruelty to a child. Her attorney filed motions. The prosecutor did not back down. I will not pretend that the legal process felt clean or satisfying. It did not. There were delays and continuances in a plea negotiation that my son and I both found inadequate. She pleaded guilty to a reduced charge and received probation and mandatory counseling, and was prohibited from unsupervised contact with any minor until further court review. My son sat in the car afterward for a long time before he drove anywhere, and when he came inside, he was very quiet, and I did not push him. I told him what I believe. The court did what the court could do. The rest, protecting his son day to day, being present, being the constant thing, that was not the court's job. It was his. And from everything I had seen of him in that terrible fall and winter, he was doing it. He filed for divorce 10 days after the plea was entered. He moved into a rental in West Asheville in November, a house with a big backyard and a covered porch, and a neighborhood with other kids who played outside in the afternoons. My grandson's bedroom was at the back of the house, facing the yard. He had asked, apparently, if he could be at the back. He said it was quieter. Those months were not easy. My grandson had nightmares for a while, not every night, but often enough. He started seeing a child therapist, a calm woman with an office full of plants and art supplies, and my son took him every week without fail. The therapist told my son that the single most important thing he could do was show up consistently, exactly when he said he would, without drama, without pressure. She said children who have had their safety disrupted rebuild it in small, repeated proofs. You say you'll be there at 3, you are there at 3. You say Tuesday, it's Tuesday. Every single time, my son took that to heart in a way that I found, honestly, moving to watch. I drove down to Asheville on Sundays. We had dinner together, the 3 of us. My grandson would tell me about school and about his baseball team and about whatever he had been doing that week that was either interesting or that had gone wrong in a way he found funny. He had started to laugh more easily. That was the thing I noticed first, before anything else. The held-back quality in him, the careful watching before speaking. It was still there. It is probably always going to be some part of who he is, but it was lighter. He was not always checking the room before he decided how to feel. In February, he had his follow-up evaluation with the child development specialist. A thorough assessment, cognitive, emotional, behavioral. My son and I sat with the doctor afterward while my grandson waited in the reception area with a book. The doctor said the results were largely positive. He said there were no significant cognitive impairments. He said there was some elevated anxiety, which was expected and responsive to the therapy already underway. He said children my grandson's age who receive consistent support and are removed from the source of harm showed strong recovery trajectories. He said the word resilience carefully, the way professionals do when they want you to hear it as real and not as a platitude. I asked him directly if there would be lasting effects. He looked at me steadily, the way doctors do when they are about to give you an honest answer. He said he could not guarantee anything. He said the most important factors now were stability, routine, presence. He said if my grandson had those things, and from everything he had seen and heard he clearly did, then his prognosis was good. I drove home from that appointment the long way, through neighborhoods I knew, past a park where I used to take my son when he was small. The trees were bare, late winter. The sky was the pale gray of early afternoon. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment before going inside. I thought about the Saturday in September when I sat on those back porch steps with a stick drawing lines in the dirt and noticed a boy wince when he moved. I thought about how easy it would have been to say nothing, to tell myself it was none of my business, or that there was probably an innocent explanation, or that bringing it up would cause trouble that wasn't mine to cause. I thought about how many months might have passed. I thought about what 8 months had already cost him. By spring, things had settled into something that felt like the beginning of solid ground. Not perfect, not without hard moments, but solid. My grandson started pitching for his baseball team in March. He had a strong arm, better control than most kids his age. His coach said so, unprompted, at the first practice I attended. I stood along the fence with the other parents and grandparents and watched him wind up and throw, and I felt something I have had difficulty naming then and since. It is not only pride, though there is pride in it. It is something that has to do with continuation, with watching a person you love come back to themselves. On a Sunday evening in April, after dinner, my son had stepped outside to take a phone call, and it was just my grandson and me at the kitchen table. He was working on a drawing he had started at school, a baseball diamond viewed from above, surprisingly detailed for a 9-year-old. He had a particular focus when he drew, a stillness that reminded me of his grandmother. He asked me, without looking up from the paper, if I had been scared that day. The day in September, I thought about the comfortable answer, the grandfather answer. Then I thought about who I was talking to and what he had already been through, and what he had already shown me he was capable of carrying. I told him yes. I told him I had been scared from the moment I saw his arm and that I had stayed scared for a long time after that. He kept drawing. He said, "But you didn't act scared." I said, "No, I didn't." He looked up at me then. He said, "How do you do that?" I thought about it for a moment. I told him it was something you practiced. I told him it did not come naturally to anyone, that the feeling of being scared was something you learned to hold beside you instead of in front of you, so that it was there but not in the way. I told him the more you practiced that, the more it became the thing you did without thinking. He considered that seriously, the way he considered most things. He said, "I think I've been practicing." I told him I thought he had too. He nodded and went back to his drawing. His father came in from outside and poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter and asked what we were talking about. My grandson looked up and said, "How to not be scared." My son looked at me over the top of his head, and I saw something in his expression that I did not need words for. I drove home that night under a sky that had gone clear and cold, more stars than you usually see this close to town. I went over the past several months the way I sometimes do on a long drive, not to go over them again, but to put them in order. The morning I saw the bruises, the urgent care clinic, the phone call, the caseworker, the long winter, the therapist, the evaluations, the Sundays. I thought about something my wife used to say when I came home from a job that had gone badly, when something had failed or someone had been hurt, or I had made a decision I was not sure was right. She would put her hand on my arm and say, "You did the next necessary thing." That was her measure. Not whether it was perfect, not whether it fixed everything, whether you did the next necessary thing when the next necessary thing needed doing. I think about that a lot now. I have thought about it since September, more than I can count. If you are reading this, and you have a child, or a grandchild, or any small person in your life, and something they say or show you, or the way they hold their body when they move, doesn't sit right with you, do not wait. Do not tell yourself you are imagining it. Do not decide that the disruption to your family is too high a cost, or that you might be wrong, or that someone else will handle it. You are the person in front of them. You are the one they reached toward when they had something too heavy to carry alone. They are always reaching, in ways you have to slow down enough to see. My grandson is doing well. His teachers say he is engaged and sharp, and that he has made friends easily in the new school. He is still pitching. His team made the playoff bracket this spring, and he called me the night they clinched, talking fast the way he talks when something is genuinely good, and I sat in my kitchen with the phone against my ear and let him go on as long as he wanted. He asked me once, a few months after everything had settled, if I had known something was wrong before he showed me his arm that day. Before the words, I told him honestly that I had noticed he seemed quieter than I remembered, that there was something in the way he held himself. I told him I was not sure I would have done anything with that if he had not shown me what he showed me. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I kind of knew you would see it." I did not trust my voice right away. I told him I was glad he knew that. I told him that was the thing about the people who love you. They are not always right, and they are not always fast enough, and they do not always know the exact right words. But they are watching. And if you give them something to see, even something small, even something you are not sure they will understand, they will see it. He said, okay. He is 9 years old. He has already been through more than a child should have to carry. And one Saturday afternoon in September, he sat on a concrete step with a stick in his hand, and he chose to let me see. I heard him. That is the only thing I know for certain that I did right. Everything else, every call made and every mile driven and every hard conversation, followed from that single thing. Do not be the person who looks away. Be the person they trusted you to be when they reached. Because they are always reaching. Every single time,